You're listening to 94.4 FM, Salford City Radio, the Friday Sports Show with your host, Jimmy Petruzzi, bringing you all the news from the local area and around the world. And we're very fortunate in this show to bring you some fascinating guests, sports people of various levels, some of the world's best athletes, sports people, footballers, coaches, trainers. We've also had our segment that we talk to people in the field of psychology, some of the most influential people in the field of psychology and mental health, share their ideas and research, and that's been really fascinating. Today we have a really fascinating guest on the show. Definitely really interested in sort of knowing more about what she does, and I think the listeners will find this really, really fascinating too. There's Jenny Morris, Director of Delivery for British Universities and Colleges in Sport. Jenny, welcome to the show. Great to have you on board.
Nice to meet you, Jim. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, no, it's great to have you on board. And at the moment, you know, obviously no one could have predicted the past year or so, and it'd be interesting to see your take on how you know, you've adapted to deliver sport for you know, I know for me sport's a huge thing, and sport brings people together. Sport's great for many different reasons. It's bonding, social, for the mind. It's great. But tell us a bit about your role, Jenny. How did you get involved in the role that you do? What sort of motivated you and inspired you to get into the role that you do?
Well, my background, I've worked for a number of NGBs over the last few years. I've been fortunate to work in sports-specific NGBs like football and rugby league, and then worked in disability sport for a little time as well. But my experiences have really spanned recreational sport, so sport for development through to performance, elite sport. So the opportunity to come and work for British Universities and Colleges Sport, or BUCS as we refer to it most of the time, was a real opportunity from my perspective, given that HE sport spans all of that. It's all encompassing. So I've been at BUCS for 5 years now, and my role as Director of Delivery means I'm kind of responsible for supporting everything that the organisation does in terms of providing programmes, projects, events for students and staff within UK universities, and it's something I'm really passionate about because, and I'll touch on this probably a little bit more in a second, but just how important HE higher education is to the sporting landscape in the UK. You know, it's where I believe lifelong participants of sport are kind of nurtured and developed, and it's a real environment for developing future talent both on and off the field. So it's a really exciting place to work in, to be honest.
Absolutely, I think it's a great job that you guys do. And one of the things that sort of strikes me, and having sort of been to the USA on a number of occasions and sort of, you know, checked out what they do at their institutions, and over here, I mean, things obviously have changed over here, don't get me wrong, it's come a long way, but many years ago I felt that the gap was a lot wider in terms of the way they sort of, you know, sport is such a huge priority at universities, colleges in the States, where here sometimes, you know, I suppose I can't speak for every university, but only my experiences, it probably doesn't have the same sort of stature really. But sort of in terms of yourself, what are your thoughts in terms of the value of sport for students? How important it is to provide them with that platform to participate and engage in sport?
Yeah, it's extremely important. I mean, the challenges we're facing at the moment through the pandemic and through COVID-19, I think, are probably a bit of a timely reminder on how important sport and physical activity is for students, and not just actually for students, for staff within universities and the broader communities in which universities are positioned. I mean, it plays a crucial role from a university perspective. Sport and physical activity does, from you know, recruitment. Students will often opt to go to a certain university because of the services and offers around physical activity and sport. It's also crucial in terms of retention, you know, student satisfaction and engaging with them and providing them a world-leading experience. It's interesting the comparison you make there to the NCAA and the system in the States, and I think, yeah, that is widely recognised, you know, as an incredible system, certainly when it comes to elite performance sport and in terms of how that's prioritised over there. But I think our system, our framework is different in the sense of our range is broader. You know, we cover 52 sports, where the NCAA, you know, it's only just in double figures, the number of sports that they cover. And from our perspective, our strategy wants to open the door to everyone who wants to play sport, not just the elite athletes. So for us, it's about recognising, some of those qualities that you just touched on around how sport can, offer an opportunity to create friends, at university, create a feeling of a family away from home, a support network, but also something that's not often touched on, but is widely recognised from a research perspective is employability and life skills that are developed through taking part in kind of physical activity. So, and that's something that we really want to focus on. We want to support across the whole spectrum of the student demographic.
Yeah, that's a great point you make there, and I think that certainly in the States, I guess that there are some obviously people who see it as an opportunity, young people, to get a scholarship and use their skill to help fund their education if they've got that. But that's really interesting. I wasn't aware that you guys well, at least over here there's a huge spectrum of sports, and I think that that's really important, because the way I see it, Jenny, only so many people can make it to the top or get the scholarship, but we can all get involved, and people sometimes probably feel a bit left out as well. But you talk about employability, I think that's really a key point there, and it's really interesting you say, and I think it's whenever I sort of do any coaching in sport, I always mention the transference of the skills. So if I do mental skills, I always talk about how can you transfer this to employability. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, what's your take on that? And that's really interesting you say that, because I certainly echo that sentiment for sure.
Yeah, so from our research, and we do quite a lot of it, being based in higher education and academia as a sector, we know that students who combine sport and physical activity alongside academic studies probably carve out the strongest of paths to success post-education. So, and that's a bold statement, right? Saying that those who combine sport with their academic studies are better positioned. But the research does point in that direction. Economists, for example, have shown that student athletes achieve greater professional success than non-athletic peers, and that's demonstrated when you compare average earnings, for example, with students who take part in sport physical activity often earning between 5 and 15% more than inactive students. And we also did a piece of research earlier this year through the British Active Student Survey, which is in partnership with UK Active and AOC, which is Association of Colleges, and that showed that active students were more likely to expect higher degree levels compared to inactive students. So, and it's interesting because when I talk about that spectrum of what we do, this accounts for whether students are involved in team or individual sports, or if they're elite athletes or just recreational participants. The experiences that they're going through help shape some of those key skills that they'll need to excel professionally. So, and that's what we believe sets them apart. And these employability benefits are something that we really want to shout about. For example, we do things like webinars and forums to kind of demonstrate that transition from pitch to boardroom, if you like, in terms of the skills and how they can be transferred. But so when we talk about the impact of lockdown on students, it's not just the immediate physical and mental potential impacts of not being able to compete in sport. It's also these life skill development, these employability values that students are missing out on developing.
Absolutely, and I mean, speaking of such, obviously at the time of this recording, we're in lockdown in the UK. This is a pre-record, so that may change. Well, I think December the 3rd, if my memory serves me correct, the date was. But, I mean, in terms of yourselves, I suppose that's been, I can imagine that's been a challenge in terms of this year. We've sort of been, had changes in tiers, and obviously, across the country there's been different levels of lockdown and so on and so forth. And also we've gone back into lockdown not long ago, and still are now at the time of this recording. But how have you guys adapted to that to sort of to carry on and keep the students engaged? Jenny, has that been possible, or what have you guys done to do that?
Yeah, well, like you said, it's almost changing like the wind, the guidelines and advice at the moment. And to be honest, even though the guidelines themselves are quite restrictive, it is that ever-changing kind of landscape and layer of uncertainty that's the biggest challenge in terms of being able to react to whatever the latest guidelines are, or what lockdown phase or tier that we're in. So, I mean, from a university perspective, to use a bit of a sporting pun, there's no playbook for this, and we're all kind of learning as we're doing at the moment. And what we've seen is universities just kind of become incredibly innovative in terms of their approach to dealing with this situation. Some universities have been really innovative in looking at repurposing facilities and campuses. There's one university at the moment who's just had their entire campus kind of recognised by the local authority as a park. Wow. To enable their students to go out and interact, obviously following the social distancing guidelines, but just as a way of supporting their students as they're locked down on campus. But a lot of universities have ventured into developing kind of virtual activities, engaging with students whilst they're in accommodation or in their residential houses, and giving them opportunities to stay active. And what we've tried to do, obviously our strategy, as I said, is wide-ranging, and we want to keep people physically active, but also give them an opportunity to engage with sport, like with competition as well. So we've got our app, BUCS Play, which is our competition management platform that normally when we're delivering competition that's face to face, whether it's our league programs or events, that app is what is there for students to register and enter and take part in our competitions. And we've been doing some work over the last couple of weeks to develop areas of that platform to enable us to offer virtual challenges. And so we've launched BUCS Challenges as part of that platform, and that's about creating virtual events for students to engage in. The challenges will range from participation focus, such as number of steps done or minutes active, to competition focus, such as distance running or cycling races. So it means we can potentially cater for all students, whether they're just trying to stay active or looking for competition. And that's something really exciting, and I think a lot of organisations and sectors can reflect on the pandemic has thrown up a lot of challenges, but there's also been some, I guess, silver linings of opportunities for us to check and challenge how we deliver, and us being able to develop our presence in this kind of virtual space is definitely one of those for us, because we're not just doing this for right now, it'll be for the future as well.
Absolutely, that's really interesting stuff. So with this sort of the app, Jenny, how does that sort of work? That they register and they log on, and then basically they sort of do challenges. So that could be like a physical challenge, and is that how it generally works, or does it then sort of create like a leaderboard type thing? And I know obviously, it's probably obviously a lot more to it than that. But generally speaking, like say for example, if I was a student, how would that work? Getting involved in the app.
Yeah, so it's really simple. So anyone who's ever played BUCS sport before, so anyone who was involved last season, so any students that are continuing this year from last, will have a BUCS Play account already. And through that account, they can go in and access these virtual events and challenges. That's really simple. Anyone who's new to university or perhaps hasn't engaged with us before can do the same. It's just downloading our BUCS Play app from the App Store and registering an account. And then you go in and you pick the type of activity or challenge you want to do. And as I said, it could be as simple as you want to do a step challenge, or you want to take part in our 10K run. And at the moment, because it's in the early stages of development, there is a need for that student to then submit their evidence. So say if they're entering into a 10K run, they could use perhaps the Strava app or something like that they've got on their phone. They do the run within the parameters that we set. So we say it has to, it's this distance, this kind of elevation, that kind of thing, students are used to doing from a competition perspective. We say go and do the run wearing your fitness, tracker or wearable. It could be a watch, your phone, whatever it is. And then once you've got your results, whatever your time was, you just screenshot that and submit it to us through the app. And that will kind of authenticate your submission. And then, yes, what it does is create leaderboards. And we've got leaderboards for all the challenges, really, because we think whether it's just a participation-focused one, like a step challenge, or an actual competition like a run or a cycle, students are interested in that kind of competition element. Absolutely. They want to see where they sit and on a regional level or a national level. So that's another element to this. We're looking at potentially regionalising some of the challenges as well, so that the local universities who've got a bit of a rivalry within that region can compete against one another. But it's just around more so celebrating students continuing to be active. So the rewards, if you like, are the intrinsic ones around the fact that they've completed this challenge, they've earned this place on the leaderboard, and they're continuing to stay physically active at a time when it's incredibly difficult to do so.
Absolutely, that's really interesting stuff, and I'll certainly sort of bring that to the awareness of any students I know of, and I'm sort of involved in the semi-pro football team too. We've been using an app too, Jenny, that Lestravi mentioned there, and it's quite interesting really. So just trying to improvise best we can to make sure the players can obviously do the physical stuff to keep them going in any way they can with the guidelines in place. In terms of yourself, your own role, obviously it's been a huge change, and it seems like you've been really proactive and adapted best you can. And I mean, has there been any sort of challenges for you, Jenny, in sort of adapting to what's been going on? Like you mentioned, the landscape changing, and things have changed a lot, this year. And for yourself, how have you sort of kept up with like the innovations? Is it something so you sort of, how do you sort of manage to sort of keep on top of things yourself?
It's really been through communication. As I said earlier, there being no playbook. I think that that is a challenge, but it's also a great leveler across kind of sport and higher education. So everyone's in the same boat, if you like, in terms of trying to find the right solutions and the right way forward. And I've really been very happy to see how open people are to sharing thoughts and ideas, and sharing challenges and sharing things that are working well for them. So we've spent a lot of time talking to universities, so staff within universities and students themselves, to understand kind of what their expectations are, what their reservations are, their worries, their fears, but also what they're willing to kind of want to do, and what parameters they're willing to work within. Obviously we went back into lockdown a couple of weeks ago, as you mentioned, but prior to that we were able to deliver some in-person competition in golf and tennis, and that was only because of in collaboration with universities and setting out really clear guidelines. And I must say the students that came along to those events were just absolutely fantastic, in terms of, because they just want to play, they just want to take part in sport. They're happy to kind of do whatever is necessary, and I think that philosophy has gone across both the university sector but also across NGBs as a whole. So we've renewed kind of relationships with NGBs that perhaps we haven't spoken to for quite an amount of time, and also strengthened relationships with NGBs that we work with on a very frequent basis. And a big change for us is we're different to a lot of NGBs in the UK, in the sense of we're not funded through Sport England to deliver our core offer. Our revenue is generated through student participation, so students paying to take part in our competitions and such. And so therefore our relationships perhaps with the likes of DCMS and other government departments weren't as strong, because we've never had that interaction previously. But obviously, given what's going on and the guidance coming out from there, we've needed to establish those quite quickly. But as I said, we found on the whole, the best thing has been how supportive and open people have been to working together. And I don't, we're not professing to have got everything right. I don't think anybody has. But I think what we're trying to do is just learn from everything, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't, and being flexible. And it's not something the sport and the sector of higher education has been known for in the past, being so agile. And it's just great to see us moving on such a quick basis to respond to stuff, because the biggest challenge is, you wake up one day and the guidelines could be completely different. We delivered our last event that Wednesday before lockdown. We were delivering right up until England went back into lockdown, but we're just keen to be ready for when it lifts again. To be honest. No,
absolutely. I think I can fully appreciate that, and obviously the students themselves. I mean, sport is a big part of their life. It's a huge part of their life, and they really enjoy it and also get a lot out of it. You know, a lot of benefits on many different levels. You know, that we sort of touched on, and many more as well. In terms of what's really interesting to me, you know, sport in the UK at university level is that you've got like a wide spectrum of ability, in the sense that, you know, you've got some really great athletes who are in academia. We've seen many great athletes who've sort of, you know, in academia in the UK. We also got, like you mentioned there, you know, people who just play, learners who just play for their own recreation. In terms of yourselves, I mean, do you sort of engage with students at all levels? Is there a specific level that you work with, or is it sort of across the broad spectrum?
It's across the broad spectrum. Tripping over my words there. It's across the broad spectrum. So, and that really is the beauty of higher education sport. It's that environment for development, whether you're a student athlete or an athlete student, and that's a bit of terminology that we use to kind of describe students based on what their motivations or their priorities are. So if you're a student athlete, you're more likely to prioritise your academic commitments, whereas you might be an athlete student who at that moment in time is prioritising, you know, their sporting commitments, but their academic study is important, but it's around kind of striking a balance between the two. Higher education as a sector, it's incredibly experienced in supporting both, you know, sporting and academic talent. And in the context of sport, you know, is there a better environment for developing athletes? That's what I would ask, because, you know, especially when you consider things like late maturation and late developers.
Absolutely.
You know, higher education is the perfect place for those types of athletes to go to. From a dual career perspective as well, right? In case those sporting kind of ambitions don't come to fruition, you know, there's an opportunity there to continue your education. But yeah, it's not just about creating athletes, though. It is about supporting lifelong participation and engagement. It's also about supporting the next generation of off-field talent, which is something that doesn't always get spoken about as much in terms of as developing athletes is. But, you know, higher education is creating the next round of sports scientists, psychologists, coaches, people like me who want to go on and work in the development of sport. Like, higher education is where those people are developing those skills. So it's incredibly important from that perspective. And from a BUCS perspective, you know, we want to continue to kind of advocate. I think people know how important higher education is to sport in the UK landscape, but it doesn't always get the recognition it deserves, and we're very keen to change that.
No, it's good, and you're doing a great job, and that's really been interesting. And sort of one scenario I've got for you here, Jenny, that you know might be able to discover what you do, but sort of something that's to sort of that I think would be interesting to see your take on it. You know, say, I mean, for me, I've sort of worked in football and you know. In the past and sort of present here and there, and one of the things for me in football, I think you can learn a lot from the way things are run academically, from an academic point of view. So you got the scholars, you know, 16 to 18, then they get released. There's a very small chance they're going to make it as a professional footballer. That's reality. The statistics will say that. So I would always encourage the scholars, if they got released, to consider going to the USA to do a scholarship, because I felt just what you said there, you know, they're training full time, but also maturation, and also there's, you know, the opportunity then to get a degree, get an education, and obviously at the end of it, if you don't become a sports person, you can become, you know, work in business, in marketing, or you have a career in something else, you know, so to speak. It might be sort of, I know in the UK that universities have improved you know, over the years in the facilities, some great universities in the UK, not just academic, sporting wise, but do you see that as being a feasible path in the UK? Do they offer a sports curriculum, for example, if say a footballer got released at 18, where they could train to a good level and be in a good team and also focus on academia?
Yeah, it's interesting. There's probably two examples I draw on to answer to that. The first one being about 4 or 5 years ago, we reviewed our rugby union competition offer in the men's side of the game, and we looked at specifically that, you know, the number of athletes that were potentially coming out of academy structures at that age and coming into higher education. Where were they going? What was happening to them? Because these are athletes that you just talked about there, that have been probably part of the performance pathway for a number of years. They might not be at the point to be selected, to go into a full-time or professional structure, but they're certainly on the cusp of, and when you talk about that, those late developers, they would definitely fall into that bracket. So we created BUCS Super Rugby as a competition structure, and that was to create a fully national competition with 8. It started off with 8 universities. It's at 10 now, and that was very much linked to providing a competition offer for the types of students that we knew were in the sector. So those that had that level of talent and wanted a certain kind of type of performance environment to go into to continue playing. And we did that to provide the right environment for them, because that's really the key to our strategy, is making sure that whatever level of athlete you are, there is an offer for you. And if you are a performance and elite athlete, we want to make sure that if you can't access that, if that's not available to you outside of higher education, then we can offer it to you inside higher education. So it's about kind of complementing what's there. And we've seen incredible success from that in terms of athletes then transitioning out, so staying within university for 3-4 years, being part of the Super Rugby programme, and then going on to professional contracts. I was watching the Autumn Internationals at the weekend, and we had I think it was like 9 or 10 BUCS Super Rugby alumni, and that programme's only been going for, as I said, 3-4 years, playing in those Autumn Internationals. That they've gone on to professional contracts and then are representing their country. Aaron Wainwright, for example, from Cardiff Met, playing in the Wales squad. So there's that example, and also you only have to look at how women's football is supported by higher education in the UK in terms of the college, the FE through to higher education. I played football at university, and I played with a number of athletes who still play in WSL now, and their dual career was around wanting to study but also still have the ability to train full-time and develop themselves as athletes. So I think from a men's football perspective, it can learn a lot really from what other sports are doing, but also what women's football is doing within higher education. Absolutely,
that's a great point. I think so. I think that would be a great point, because I think obviously, after the sort of they get to 18 years of age, and obviously a decision needs to be made there. And we do see players sometimes go into non-league and make their way back into the pro game. But equally in saying that, as inspiring as it is when you hear that, that's a very, very small percentage, and the likelihood is, I would always say to the footballers, get your head down, study, get through the course, whatever course that was an offer at the time, because university is obviously a great pathway for you. And I suppose from their point of view, they were probably athlete first, and hence I used to suggest sometimes consider the USA, although that was a big move for them, because I just felt that they would get that opportunity to train pretty much every day as well. And but that's really interesting stuff that you said there. That's really, really powerful stuff, and I certainly think that football, at least in the men's game, can learn from that. Going forward, what's your vision, Jenny? I know obviously things are changing, and in December things may change again, and you've done a great job of adapting to the changes. But what's your vision for what you do going forward for BUCS Sport?
I think it's two things really. It's one, we want to be ready, as I said, for when we can return to sport and physical activity in person. We want to make sure that we learned from that transition from the first lockdown into the start of this semester, as I said, because we were able to deliver some in-person activity, but obviously there was a period of understanding kind of what guidelines and what safety measures, and our event team, for example, did a fantastic job in terms of making our events kind of COVID measure safe, and we've got all that learning now. So I think we're we feel pretty confident that when students and universities are ready to kind of get back into competitive sport, that we'll be ready to do that for them. So that's one of our key visions and aims. And the other is really, we know that the financial impact of the pandemic is going to be felt on university budgets, and so we want to make sure that everything we've just touched on, there around the value of sport across physical, mental well-being, through to opportunities to develop as athletes, through to employability and life skills, that's still recognised as a priority within institutions, so that sport departments, student unions within universities can make the case up into the senior management of those institutions to make sure that when budget decisions are being made, that sport and physical activity still remains as a priority in their operational strategies. So
absolutely,
they're the two really important things for us at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Hopefully, like any policymakers listening, realise how important sport is to students at university, and all things said and done, they are the future in many respects of this country and the world, really, in terms of moving forward, and it's really important, I think, that they're provided with that platform to get out there and participate in what they love to do. And in terms of, say, this sort of show goes out predominantly in the north of the UK, but we sort of get a global audience. Is there any sort of way anyone who's been listening to the show can get in touch? Any university students can sort of to know more if they're not already aware about what you guys do? Jenny, is there any sort of website, any details I can sort of access?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got our website, BUCS.org.uk, which anyone can visit, and you can see all the information. It's very up to date in terms of what we've got planned from a recreational perspective, and our development programs like BUCS Active 4, our virtual competitions. That's around downloading the app I mentioned earlier, BUCS Play, and registering on that and seeing what's available. But I would also encourage students, to engage with their sport departments, with their student unions within their universities, because that's who we're linking with on a daily basis, and we're supporting them to deliver to their university. So if you like, students can come to us for one kind of national offering to enter our challenges. But we know that universities themselves are trying to deliver stuff locally to their students as well, and we're trying to support them with the profiling and the promotion of that. So yeah, there's a number of ways that anyone, especially if they're a student, is interested in getting involved, can kind of access through to the stuff we're doing.
That's great stuff, and I really want to thank you for coming on board the show, Jenny. It's been really interesting and informative, and no doubt the listeners have really taken away a really, really great insight to what you do, and obviously sport as a landscape at college and university level in the UK. So thanks for coming on board, Jenny. It's been great to speak to you. That was Jenny Morris, Director of Delivery for British Colleges and University Sport. Fantastic, really fascinating insight. So we wish you all the very best, and thanks again for coming on board.
Thank you very much, Jim.